In today's episode, something big is happening on the moon, and this time it's not NASA leading the charge. China is building a nuclear power plant on the lunar surface. Yes, a real nuclear facility, on the moon. And it's not just China. They've teamed up with Russia, and both nations have quietly signed a new agreement to make this futuristic vision a reality. Meanwhile, SpaceX has just announced a new launch date for their next Starship mission. And over at NASA, some serious cuts are being made that could completely reshape America's lunar ambitions. The China-Russia partnership for a lunar power plant has taken many by surprise. Their space agencies had been in quiet talks for several weeks, and now it's official. Both countries have committed to constructing a nuclear-powered infrastructure on the moon. This power is crucial for China's long-term moon base project, called the International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS. This ambitious facility, first announced back in 2021, is designed to be fully robotic and will be built at the moon's south pole. The initial goal is automation, but human presence is definitely on the roadmap. Originally, this lunar station was pitched as a joint venture between China and Russia. But after the war in Ukraine began in 2022, the Russian role became less visible, with little official mention for quite a while. Now, with this new nuclear agreement signed during a state visit to Moscow by China's president, the partnership appears to be fully back on. And this isn't just symbolic. Both governments are serious about building real infrastructure, starting with autonomous construction, but eventually laying the groundwork for humans to live and work on the moon. In an official statement, Russia's space agency confirmed that the project will support fundamental space research and serve as a testbed for long-term, uncrewed operations. They emphasized that the ultimate goal is a sustainable human presence on the lunar surface. That's why power generation is such a critical piece. The moon's unique day-night cycle, 14 Earth days of sunlight followed by 14 days of darkness, makes solar energy extremely unreliable. Batteries can help, but they're heavy, expensive, and lose efficiency in freezing temperatures. And when night falls on the moon, it gets unimaginably cold. That's why nuclear energy is the ideal solution. Unlike solar panels, a nuclear reactor can run continuously, providing stable energy during both day and night. And when it comes to building nuclear power plants, Russia is unmatched. The Russian company Rosatom is the world's largest producer of nuclear reactors. Combine that with over 70 years of experience in spaceflight, and you've got a partner that's more than capable of helping China pull this off. If any country can build and operate a working nuclear reactor on the moon, it's Russia, and they now have the full support of China to make it happen. The reactor won't be a full-size nuclear plant like we have on Earth. Most likely, it'll be a downsized version. Smaller, lighter, and easier to transport into space. Still, it will need to be redesigned to function in the moon's lower gravity and hostile environment. Even then, the core operation of the system will remain the same. The main unknown right now is the fuel. On Earth, reactors are usually powered with small pellets of enriched uranium. These could be launched to the moon on dedicated cargo rockets. But in the future, there's a more ambitious plan. Scientists have already confirmed that uranium exists on the moon. If China and Russia can figure out how to mine and refine it locally, that would create a sustainable, closed-loop power system, built and powered entirely off Earth. It sounds like science fiction, but that's the direction they're clearly heading. According to China's official schedule, construction of the ILRS will happen between 2031 and 2035. But here's the twist. They plan to build the entire system, including the research base and power plant, right here on Earth first. Then they'll launch it to the moon in modular parts. To do this, China is counting on its new Long March 9 rocket, a massive, super-heavy launch system similar to SpaceX's Starship. They've already planned 5 separate construction missions using this vehicle. But let's be real, that's a huge challenge. No one has ever built anything close to a permanent moon base, let alone shipped a nuclear power plant into orbit. And even the best prepared plans can fall apart when reality kicks in. This timeline is incredibly ambitious, and hitting those milestones will take a level of precision and luck that few space agencies have ever pulled off. At the same time, while China and Russia are ramping up their lunar goals, NASA is taking a very different path. Over the past few months, funding cuts and shifting priorities have forced the agency to scale back key parts of its lunar program. One of the biggest casualties is the Gateway Space Station, a planned orbital hub that would serve as a stopover point for astronauts heading to the moon. Despite some of its components already being built, the project is now on life support. There's a real chance Gateway may never fly. And it doesn't stop there. NASA's flagship launch system, the Space Launch System or SLS, is also hitting some serious roadblocks. Artemis 2, the next planned crewed mission, is still officially scheduled for 2026. That flight will take astronauts around the moon and return them to Earth. Then, Artemis 3 is supposed to actually land humans on the surface in 2027. But even if those missions stay on schedule, they may mark the end of the SLS program altogether. Budget limitations and performance issues have put the entire future of SLS in doubt. A huge part of NASA's future moon plan is now riding on SpaceX and their Starship system. It's supposed to be the next-generation moon lander for the Artemis program and the backbone of America's long-term space exploration efforts. But here too things aren't going exactly as planned. SpaceX has just announced their next Starship launch window, which comes more than 2.5 months after their last test flight. That flight ended in disaster, with the upper stage of the rocket breaking apart in space and raining down as a fireball over the Atlantic. Unfortunately, that wasn't a one-time thing. The previous Starship launch suffered a very similar fate, another catastrophic failure that saw the rocket destroyed mid-flight. What's different this time is that both failed flights were testing SpaceX's new upper stage design, called Starship V2. It's a major redesign meant to solve some of the problems that plagued earlier models. But clearly there are still serious bugs to work out. Despite this, SpaceX now says they're confident the next launch will go better. Whether that's optimism or calculated risk, we'll find out soon enough. In today's story, things are heating up. On the moon, China, together with Russia, has officially announced plans to build a nuclear power plant on the lunar surface. This isn't just a fantasy or a distant dream. It's a part of their broader ambition to establish a long-term moon base. At the same time, SpaceX is getting ready for another major Starship test flight, and NASA, once the undisputed leader in space exploration, is now facing significant funding cuts that could reshape its future operations in space. These developments are signs of a rapidly changing landscape in the space race, with new alliances forming and priorities shifting at breakneck speed. This new nuclear power project is centered around China's International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS, which was first introduced back in 2021. The ILRS is expected to be a fully robotic base, constructed at the lunar South Pole and designed to operate without human presence, at least initially. The timeline they've set is for construction to start in the early 2030s and continue into the mid-2030s. But now, with this new partnership between China and Russia, the plans have taken a giant leap forward. After some quiet years, Russia is officially back in the picture, with both nations signing the nuclear deal during the Chinese president's recent visit to Moscow. The ILRS was always envisioned as a joint Chinese-Russian venture, but their collaboration was put on ice after the war in Ukraine erupted in 2022. Since then, Russia's role had faded into the background, with few official mentions. But now, it appears both nations are reviving the original blueprint. What's interesting is that they're starting with nuclear power, arguably the most critical and technically demanding aspect of any off-world base. This nuclear plant would provide consistent, reliable energy, solving a major challenge faced by lunar missions: the moon's brutal day-night cycle that lasts 14 Earth days each. Unlike Earth, where solar panels work efficiently with a 24-hour cycle, the moon's environment isn't friendly to solar energy. After 2 weeks of continuous sunlight, the moon plunges into total darkness for another 2 weeks. Temperatures drop to extreme lows and batteries, already heavy and hard to transport, lose efficiency in the cold. That's where nuclear comes in. Unlike solar panels or batteries, a small nuclear reactor could continuously provide power regardless of the light cycle. And when it comes to nuclear technology, Russia is a natural partner. Their state-owned firm Rosatom is the world's leading manufacturer of nuclear reactors. Russia's 7 decades of space experience, combined with their nuclear prowess, make them uniquely positioned to help China pull this off. The plan is to build a smaller version of an existing nuclear plant, compact enough to launch in pieces and reassemble on the moon. Some adaptations will be necessary for lunar gravity and other environmental conditions, but the basic principles remain unchanged. Initially, they'll have to ship fuel, likely uranium pellets, from Earth, but both countries are eyeing future lunar mining opportunities. There is evidence that uranium is present in lunar soil, and that could eventually make the operation fully self-sustaining. China's construction roadmap aims to launch between 2031 and 2035, with all major components being built on Earth first and then transported to the moon in segments. For this, China is banking on its upcoming Long March 9 rocket, a massive super heavy launcher designed to rival SpaceX's Starship. They've scheduled at least 5 launches dedicated to assembling the lunar base and its power plant. However, as ambitious as this plan sounds, it raises many questions. After all, no one has ever built a nuclear reactor or a full-fledged moon base before. The risks are immense and the road is untested. At the same time that China and Russia are surging forward with their lunar plans, NASA seems to be heading in the opposite direction. The Gateway Space Station, once pitched as the central hub for American astronauts traveling to the moon, is now essentially dead in the water. Despite large segments of the Gateway already having been constructed, NASA has decided to pull back. Similarly, the development of the SLS moon rocket has slowed dramatically. While Artemis II, scheduled for 2026, is still expected to send a crew around the moon, Artemis III, targeted for 2027, might be its final mission if it even gets off the ground at all. NASA's hopes are now pinned on SpaceX's Starship, the new heavy-lift vehicle intended to serve as both the moon lander and the long-term replacement for SLS. But that program hasn't exactly been smooth sailing either. After a string of failed tests, SpaceX is preparing for another big launch. Their last test flight ended with the upper stage of Starship breaking apart in space and crashing back to Earth in a fiery explosion. This was almost a carbon copy of the flight before that, both resulting in massive debris fields. While the early failures were seen as part of the learning process, the pressure is now mounting for SpaceX to deliver a breakthrough. The last two test flights were different from earlier ones because they used a new version of the Starship upper stage, referred to as Starship V2. There are still technical problems with the new design, but SpaceX seems confident that they're getting close to a working model. For the upcoming flight, one of the most notable changes isn't in the upper stage, but in the Super Heavy booster, the rocket's first stage. For the first time ever, SpaceX will attempt to reuse a booster that has flown before. This particular booster was used in Flight 7 earlier in 2025, and although the upper stage exploded, the booster successfully returned to Earth. That booster was caught by the launch tower's mechanical arms, dubbed Mechazilla, and has since undergone 4 months of refurbishment. SpaceX now believes it's ready to fly again. However, since this is uncharted territory, they're not taking any big risks. Instead of trying to catch the booster again, which could be dangerous if something goes wrong, they've decided to bring it down into the ocean. This safer landing method reduces risk to ground equipment and infrastructure, and the change was officially filed in their new launch license for Flight 9 with the FAA. The goal this time is to get the upper stage into orbit and complete a successful re-entry. As part of their prep work, SpaceX has been extensively testing Ship 35, the third build of their V2 Starship. Just this past week, it underwent 2 static fire tests, one of which replicated the orbital insertion burn by lighting all 6 engines for about a minute. Interestingly, the first test last month revealed some serious issues when a piece of the engine was visibly ejected during the fire. But that didn't happen in the latest test, suggesting that SpaceX has fixed at least one of the major problems. Still, whether these improvements are enough remains to be seen. This is what the next flight will reveal. SpaceX originally promised a launch date sometime this week, but that timeline has already slipped. Flight 9 was first scheduled for May 21st, but new maritime and aviation notices indicate a delay until at least May 26th. While SpaceX continues to push forward, NASA is scrambling to adapt to its shrinking budget. One of the most significant changes coming out of this new strategy is a cut to the International Space Station program. With the ISS set to retire in 2030, NASA is already planning for reduced operations. The crew size aboard the station will be cut from 7 to 6, which may not seem like much, but it makes a big difference in terms of cost. Currently, NASA sends 4 astronauts at a time on SpaceX Crew Dragon missions. Under the new plan, they'll reduce that number to just 3. Russia, on the other hand, will maintain its 3 cosmonaut crew. This cutback begins with Crew 12 in February of next year. Fewer astronauts means fewer supplies and less cost, but it also means less science, fewer experiments, and lower productivity aboard the ISS. So why now? If the ISS is still active until 2030, why start downsizing in 2026? The answer lies in a broader government policy shift. The Trump administration's new budget proposal slashes funding for non-defense programs, and NASA is being hit hard. This isn't just a temporary measure, it's part of a long-term strategy to reallocate funds. A significant portion of NASA's future budget will go toward one massive final project, the controlled deorbit of the ISS. NASA has awarded a massive $850 million contract to SpaceX to build a special deorbit vehicle, based on their Dragon capsule, to safely bring the station down. But with funding already stretched thin, NASA has had to make painful sacrifices. That includes cutting back on current science missions aboard the ISS and laying off ground personnel. Both the Johnson Space Center and Marshall Space Flight Center will lose half of their staff. To save even more, the duration of astronaut missions is being extended from 6 months to 8 months. In a recent statement, NASA acknowledged these changes, saying they are reviewing operations and making adjustments to support the station's retirement. While these aren't final decisions, the writing is on the wall. NASA is pivoting to a new era, one where deep space exploration may be scaled back, and maintaining even a low Earth orbit presence is no longer guaranteed. It's a sobering contrast to the ambitious plans of China and Russia, who are pouring resources into building the future of human spaceflight, one nuclear reactor at a time.